What if the man everyone called a monster was the only one willing to sacrifice everything to protect the person he loved? When a young scholar offers himself to save his father, he finds himself trapped inside the estate of a feared vampire alpha lord. But the truth hidden behind Blackthorn's walls is far different from the terrifying legends whispered throughout the valley. Betrayal, sacrifice, forbidden love, and an ancient bond will change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional BL stories filled with romance and drama, please like this video, subscribe to BL Heartstring Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new release. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Weight of a Dream. My father's life was worth more to me than any dream. But I never imagined that trying to save him would mean destroying a lord's only memory of his mother. Ever since I was old enough to hold a quill, I dreamed of the world beyond our valley. While other children played, I buried myself in books, mapping distant stars and dreaming of the Royal Academy. My father, Marcus, was my entire world, a gentle apothecary who believed knowledge was a quiet kind of magic. "Knowledge is like a seed, Elijah," he'd say, bringing me tea while I studied late beneath the glow of a candle. "Plant it well, and it will carry you farther than I ever could." But time is merciless. The winter pale fever stole his strength, and our savings vanished into medicine. I set aside my dreams to work as a scribe, willing to sacrifice 1,000 futures just to keep him alive. Then a chance arrived. Mr. Gable, the steward of the infamous Blackthorn estate, came looking for the best botanist in the province. Lord Damian's prized night-blooming herbs, flowers planted by his late mother a century ago, were mysteriously dying. The reward was enough to pay our debts and send me to the academy. Father accepted immediately. For 3 days, he worked in the great glasshouses of Blackthorn. Everything he knew told him the plants needed a restorative treatment. What he didn't know was that the very earth beneath Blackthorn had turned bitter over the decades. The medicine he prepared didn't heal the flowers, it acted like a poison. By sunrise, the century-old flowers had withered to ash. My father had gone to Blackthorn to secure my future, but he returned having destroyed the only piece of the past Lord Damian had left. We stood in the silence of our home, staring at his trembling, soil-stained hands. We both knew the blackened leaves were a death sentence. By sunset, the bailiffs were at the door with a warrant for his arrest. "If your mother were alive, Elijah, she would never forgive me," Marcus rasped as they led him away in chains. "I was supposed to send you to the academy, not destroy our future." "The academy can wait, father," I promised, clutching his shaking hands before they pulled him into the cold. "You are my world. I'll find a way." I stayed behind for 2 days, putting our home in order and gathering my research ledgers. When there was nothing left to do, I wrapped myself in my winter cloak and set off up the frozen mountain pass. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to offer Lord Damian the only thing I had left, myself. As I walked, a hunter stopped me, his voice a low warning. "Turn back, boy. No servant who goes up that mountain ever survives a year. They say the Lord hangs the bones of intruders from his iron gates." I pushed past the fear, pressing onward until the fortress rose against the gray sky like an ancient obsidian beast. Inside, the estate was cold and dark as a tomb, smelling of old parchment and dried lavender. Standing by a high window was Lord Damian. He was broad-shouldered and imposing, draped in a crimson velvet coat. When he turned, the pale winter light caught his eyes, and my breath hitched. They were a deep, liquid crimson. He was a vampire alpha hybrid, a creature of legend whose very presence made the air feel physically thick. "You are Marcus's son," Damian said, his voice a low, vibrating baritone. "Your father's incompetence ruined a harvest that took decades to cultivate. Why are you here?" "I am here to offer a settlement," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Punishing my father won't bring back your flowers. But I am a trained botanist. Give me 6 months. I will live at the estate and cultivate a new crop to clear the debt." Damian turned slowly, his red eyes cold with rage. "You think a boy with a satchel of books can undo this damage?" "I know I can," I replied, holding my head high. "In exchange, you will pardon my father and release him today." Something in my words snapped his patience. In a terrifying blur of motion, Damian closed the distance. He towered over me, his massive frame casting a shadow that felt like a cage. "You dare come into my home and make demands?" His voice boomed like thunder. His lip curled, exposing the razor-sharp gleam of fangs. "You are arrogant, boy. Get out of my sight before I throw you into the dungeons with your father." The raw, monstrous fury hit me like a physical blow. My composure shattered. A wave of pure, instinctive terror surged through me, and before I could stop it, a rich wave of my midnight violet omega pheromones escaped into the icy air. Damian froze. The rage died in his throat. His jaw locked, and his crimson eyes dilated until they were pitch black. He gripped the edge of a nearby oak desk so hard the wood groaned. He stared at me as if I were a ghost. After an eternity of suffocating silence, he spoke. His voice was no longer booming, it was raspy and dangerously tight. "What did you say your terms were, scholar?" "As 6 months, my lord," I stammered. "I restore the harvest, and my father goes free." Damian stood motionless. 6 months, he repeated softly. "You will have access to the archives. Your father will be released today. Go to the guardhouse. Say your farewells and see him off my grounds." My knees were still shaking as I found my father in the guardhouse. When I told him the bargain, he sobbed, clutching my shoulders. "No. Elijah, you cannot stay here. He is a monster, he'll destroy you." "He won't, father," I said firmly, kissing his forehead. "Go home. Keep the fire burning in the hearth. 6 months will pass before you know it." I watched the heavy iron gates groan shut, locking me in and him out. As his silhouette disappeared into the white fog, I looked up at the west tower. Lord Damian was there, a silent shadow behind the frost-covered glass, his crimson eyes watching me through the dark. My old life was gone. My 6 months had officially begun. Chapter 2. Shadows, Sunlight, and Warmth. The grand entrance hall felt vast and hollow after my father's departure. The heavy oak doors closed behind me with a dull echo. I stood alone, clutching my leather satchel as the reality settled over me. I had traded my freedom for 6 months inside the estate of the man my village called a monster. I looked around. Blackthorn Estate was nothing like the crumbling ruin I had imagined. Built of dark blue slate and white marble, it was elegant rather than sinister. Towering stained-glass windows cast streaks of crimson, violet, and indigo across polished obsidian floors, while the scent of dried lavender and cold mountain stone lingered in the silent hall. "You must be young Master Elijah." The gentle voice startled me. A distinguished silver-haired beta descended the staircase, followed by a plump, kind-faced woman carrying a silver tray with steaming tea and freshly baked honey-cinnamon biscuits. "Forgive us for not greeting you sooner, dear boy," the woman said warmly, setting the tray aside before taking my freezing hands. "You're shivering. Come away from the door and warm yourself by the fire." Who are you?" I asked. "I am Barnaby, the head butler of Blackthorn Estate," the silver-haired man said with a graceful bow. "And I'm Margaret Gable," the woman said with a smile. "You've already met my husband, Mr. Gable, our head steward." She draped a thick wool shawl over my shoulders. "We've looked after this estate since Lord Damian was a little boy." "Oh, you poor dear. You look as though you've just escaped an execution." I thought Lord Damian lived here alone," I admitted, accepting the warm cup of chamomile tea. "The village says no human can live here. They say he's a monster." "The village knows very little," Barnaby replied quietly. "They see a secluded lord behind mountain walls and let fear invent the rest." "He nearly threw me into the dungeons," I whispered. "I thought he was going to tear me apart." Mrs. Gable smiled gently. Our Lord's bark has always been worse than his bite. She guided me into a velvet armchair beside the roaring fireplace. Tell me, Master Elijah, what do they teach about hybrids in the valley? I thought for a moment that they're dangerous, abominations of nature. Nonsense, Barnaby said. A pure vampire cannot endure the sun and lives only for blood. But Lord Damian is a vampire alpha hybrid. His alpha blood allows him to walk beneath the sun like anyone else. My eyes widened. He can walk in sunlight? Quite easily, Barnaby nodded. His hybrid blood grants him strength far beyond that of an ordinary alpha or vampire. But it is also a terrible burden. An alpha is driven to protect. A vampire is cursed with endless blood hunger. Lord Damian carries both. Mrs. Gable's smile faded. For 3 years, our Lord has starved himself. He hides in the West Wing not because he despises people, but because he fears losing control. His alpha instincts tell him to protect others, while his vampire blood constantly hungers for them. Her words struck me harder than I expected. My mind flashed back to the study, to Damian's locked jaw and the white-knuckled grip he had on the heavy oak desk. He hadn't stopped shouting because he was satisfied with frightening me. He had stopped because he was fighting himself. Barnaby, my husband, and I raised that boy after his parents died, Mrs. Gable said softly, resting a comforting hand on my knee. We watched him grow into a kind, brilliant young man who loved music, botany, and history. His blood hunger has turned this home into a prison. When he shouted at you today, he was trying to drive you away before he lost control. I stared into my tea as understanding slowly replaced my fear. He wasn't a monster waiting to devour me. He was a man imprisoned by his own nature. Come now, dear, Mrs. Gable said, brightening. Let's show you your room. You need some rest before dinner. She led me up the grand staircase and through the east wing. The estate was enormous. We passed a music hall with a grand piano beneath a skylight, a conservatory filled with sleeping winter vines, and halls lined with ancient suits of armor. Sunlight poured through tall windows, filling the corridors with warmth instead of darkness. Mrs. Gable opened a pair of carved double doors. Here we are. I stepped inside. A large canopy bed stood beside a roaring fireplace. A polished mahogany desk waited with fresh parchment, ink, and quills. Beyond the balcony doors, the snow-covered glasshouses stretched across the estate, while an adjoining reading lounge was lined with towering bookshelves. It's beautiful, I breathed. We wanted you to feel at home, Master Elijah, Barnaby said. Your research ledgers have already been placed on the desk. Dinner is served at 6. Will Lord Damian be joining us? Barnaby offered a gentle smile. His lordship rarely leaves his private quarters these days. But perhaps that may change. After they left, I walked onto the balcony. Across the courtyard, sunlight poured through the windows of the West Tower. Lord Damian stood there. Even from this distance, I felt the weight of his crimson gaze. He remained motionless beneath the winter sun, a lonely hybrid watching over his estate. This time, I didn't look away. I tightened Mrs. Gable's shawl around my shoulders and met his gaze, knowing these 6 months would become far more than a scholar's duty. Chapter 3: Soil, Sun, and Silver Vines. I woke early the next morning to golden sunlight spilling through my balcony doors. After breakfast, I gathered my botanical satchel and headed for the glasshouses. It was time to fulfill my end of the bargain. 3 great glasshouses rested against the snowy mountains like giant crystals. Warm, humid air greeted me as I stepped inside the central conservatory. Ferns, orchids, and winter ivy filled the space, but at its center lay the ruined harvest, raised beds of blackened soil where the night-blooming herbs had once flourished. Well, well, you must be the scholar from the valley. A cheerful young man emerged from beneath a canopy of citrus trees, wiping dirt from his hands. I'm Toby, he said with a grin. Mrs. Gable's son. I shook his hand. I'm Elijah. It's good to meet you. I'm glad you're here, Toby laughed. I can grow vegetables just fine, but these royal herbs? They're far beyond me. When I heard you bargained your way into Blackthorn to save them, I figured we finally had some hope. My father unknowingly disrupted the soil balance, I explained, pulling out my ledgers and trowel. If we neutralize the acidity with lime, remove the dead roots, and restore the soil with fresh compost and earthworms, the beds should recover within 2 months. Toby's eyes lit up. Brilliant! Come on, I'll show you where we keep the fresh compost. For the next few hours, Toby and I worked side by side. He was quick with a joke, hard-working, and full of easy laughter. As we shoveled soil and catalogued root samples, he filled me in on castle life and his mother's baking. What about Lord Damian? I asked quietly, sifting dark earth through my fingers. Does he ever come down here? Toby's cheerful smile softened, his posture turning quiet and reflective. He used to spend hours down here, Toby said softly. Before 3 years ago. Back then, his lordship managed his vampire side by hunting wild game in the high mountain forests. Animal blood was enough to keep his hunger quiet, so he lived normally among us. What changed 3 years ago? I asked, setting my trowel down. He turned 24, Toby whispered. That's when a hybrid reaches full maturity. His alpha rut and vampire bloodlust awakened together. Animal blood no longer sustained him, and his instincts demanded a mate. Toby swallowed hard, glancing toward the high glass ceiling. Then came the near accident, Toby continued quietly. One evening, his blood hunger flared out of nowhere while he was talking to Barnaby. Damian's fangs slipped, his mind went half feral, and he nearly lunged at Barnaby's neck. He caught himself at the very last second, shoving Barnaby away so hard he shattered a stone pillar. Horrified by how close he had come to hurting the man who raised him, Damian swore off human blood completely. Since then, he's become withdrawn, keeping everyone at arm's length while quietly starving himself. My throat tightened. The image of Damian battling his own body, choosing painful starvation over risking the lives of his household, hit me right in the heart. A week into my stay, the conservatory truly began to change. With Toby's help, I cleared away the dead foliage, pruned the silver night vines, and mixed a specialized blend of crushed charcoal and volcanic ash into the soil. I was standing on a wooden stepladder, tying a delicate vine to a high iron trellis, when a shadow fell across the workbench below. I looked down to see Damian standing beneath the shaded glass arches. He wore a dark cloak over a simple white linen shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark trousers. The sunlight caught his sharp features, making his dark hair gleam. He looked remarkably handsome, though the exhausted shadows beneath his crimson eyes remained. "You should be careful on that ladder," Damian said, his voice carrying a quiet warmth that was becoming increasingly familiar. Toby gasped, instantly dropping into a low bow. "And my lord." My heart gave a sudden thud. "I've climbed taller trees than this in the valley, my lord." I laughed softly, securing a knot before climbing down. I wiped my soil-dusted hands on my apron. Damian walked down the stone aisle, his gaze locked entirely on me. "Leave us, Toby," Damian said softly. "Yes, my lord." Toby nodded quickly, giving me a supportive wink before hurrying out the heavy glass doors. A quiet stillness settled over the glasshouse, filled only by the soft trickle of a fountain. I stood my ground, holding my trowel, my chest rising and falling as I met his crimson gaze. As Damian stepped closer, the subtle, sweet fragrance of midnight violet drifted between us in the warm air. The moment my scent reached him, Damian closed his eyes and exhaled. The tension left his shoulders as the blood hunger seemed to quiet in my presence. "You speak to my staff as if you have lived here for years, Elijah," Damian said softly, opening his eyes to look at me across the soil bed. "Toby was kind enough to show me the tools, my lord," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I am simply keeping my promise." Damian looked down at the blackened earth, then at my hands, smudged with dirt and plant sap. "Can these plants truly be saved?" he asked quietly. They can, I said firmly, looking directly into his crimson eyes. It just takes time, patience, and proper care. Nothing is beyond saving if you give it what it needs to heal, not even this garden. Damian stared at me for a long moment. Slowly, hesitatingly, he raised a hand. His cold knuckles gently brushed a speck of soil from my cheek. The tenderness in his touch made my heart leap. His hand lingered for the briefest moment before he drew it away and looked toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the glass. Perhaps, he murmured softly, do your work, Elijah. I will not disturb you. He turned and walked back through the sunlit aisle. My heart leaped in my chest. For the very first time, he hadn't called me scholar or boy. He had called me Elijah. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Valley. The glasshouse work quickly became my sanctuary. Day by day, under Toby's cheerful guidance and my own botanical care, the scorched soil began to darken, and the first emerald shoots of night-blooming herbs broke through the earth. Yet, even as life returned to the garden, a cold chill was brewing beyond the mountain pass. I was leaning over a wooden bed, carefully inspecting root structures with a small brass magnifying glass, while Toby leaned on his shovel nearby, chatting about the noble lords who ruled the surrounding territories. Most of the local nobles are tight-fisted old fools who only care about grain taxes, especially that self-proclaimed magistrate down in the lower valley, Lord Silas, Toby scoffed, tossing a handful of dry weeds into a bucket. He acts like he owns the entire province. At the sound of that name, my hand froze mid-air. The brass handle felt icy cold in my fingers. A sharp, instinctive chill ran straight down my spine, making the breath catch in my throat as dark memories from the valley rushed back. Elijah! Toby paused, his friendly smile instantly fading as he saw my face go pale. Hey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Silas, I whispered, my voice trembling as the nightmare came flooding back. That name? It sends a chill through me. Months ago, he came to our apothecary pretending he needed rare herbs. When I stepped into the dark alley behind the shop to fetch them, he trapped me against the stone wall and tried to force his bond on me right then and there. Toby gasped softly, his knuckles turning white on the handle of his spade. If my father's friend hadn't heard me struggling, I don't know what would have happened, I continued, my chest tightening at the memory. After that, father kept me hidden while Silas kept pressuring him with threats and debt, trying to force him into a marriage contract. Silas doesn't see people as lives, Toby. He sees them as property. Toby's jaw tightened. That miserable monster. Don't worry, Elijah. You're safe on Blackthorn Mountain. He can't touch you here. Neither of us realized that, high above in the west tower, Lord Damian stood beside an open window. He heard every word, the fear in my voice, the truth of what Silas had tried to do. Something ancient and possessive stirred within his alpha instinct. He said nothing. He simply watched the mountain pass long after our voices faded. The peace of Blackthorn Estate ended on a bitter Thursday morning. I was gathering dried winter lavender when the heavy iron gates rattled open. A gilded carriage bearing the municipal council's crest rolled into the courtyard, escorted by 4 armed guards. Lord Silas stepped out, adjusting his fur-trimmed coat before his eyes found me. Well, well, he sneered. The little scholar. I heard your father sold you to the beast on the hill. My father made a legal contract, I replied calmly. I am fulfilling my service here. A contract with a monster means nothing in provincial court. He reached for my wrist. Your father still owes the council. You're coming with me. Let go of me. Barnaby stepped onto the front step. Lord Silas, you have no authority within Blackthorn Estate. Return to your carriage. Silas scoffed. I've come under provincial protective decree. Word reached the valley that an unregistered Omega is being kept in this nest of monsters. I'm here to reclaim him. My blood ran cold. He hadn't come for taxes. He had come for me. Before he could pull me away, an icy wave swept across the courtyard. The great obsidian doors swung open. Lord Damian stepped outside. His crimson coat billowed in the wind, his eyes blazing with fury. The crushing force of his alpha aura spread across the courtyard, forcing Silas's guards to stumble backward. "You dare lay your hands on someone under my roof?" His voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. "You trespass on my land, Silas." Silas released my wrist but forced a smirk. "So this is the legendary hybrid beast. Tell me, Damian, does the council know you're hiding a human Omega inside your fortress? Hand the boy over. He belongs under proper civil administration, not locked away as a toy for a starving monster." He took another step. "Besides, a pretty little Omega deserves a Real Lord's bed, not." Snap. Damian disappeared. A heartbeat later, Silas slammed against his carriage. Damian held him by the throat with one hand, lifting him off the ground as the wood cracked beneath the impact. The guards reached for their swords but froze under Damian's overwhelming aura. "Damian," Silas gasped. "I am an officer of the High Provincial Council. This mountain is royal sovereign land," Damian said, his fangs flashing. "The council has no authority here." He leaned closer. "If you ever touch him again, or speak his name with that filthy mouth, I will drain you where you stand and scatter your bones across the valley." Every trace of arrogance vanished from Silas's face. "And my lord, please." Damian released him. Silas collapsed into the snow, clutching his throat before scrambling into his carriage. "Get off my mountain," Damian said coldly. "If I see your carriage here again, your guards will return without you." The carriage raced down the mountain. The iron gates slammed shut behind it. Silence returned. I stood frozen, my heart still racing. Damian remained where he was, breathing slowly as he forced the fury inside him back under control. At last, he turned to me. The anger in his crimson eyes melted away. "Did he hurt you?" he asked quietly. "No," I whispered, meeting his gaze. "I am unhurt, thanks to you." Damian stepped closer and gently guided me behind him, shielding me with his broad shoulders as though the entire world had become a threat. There was no monster in his crimson eyes. Only a fierce protector determined to keep me safe. Chapter 5. The Shared Hearth. The tension from the confrontation lingered long after Silas's carriage disappeared into the mountain mist. That evening, Mrs. Gable led me into the estate's small dining room. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the cozy room with golden warmth. To my surprise, the table was set for two. "Mrs. Gable?" I asked. "Are we expecting guests?" "Not guests, dear," she replied with a smile. "His lordship." My heart skipped. "Lord Damian?" "Barnaby said he hasn't dined with anyone for 3 years." "Which is exactly why it's time he did," Barnaby said from the doorway. "His lordship has agreed to join you this evening." Damian entered the room. Without his heavy coat, dressed only in a cream silk shirt and dark trousers, he looked younger and tired. His crimson eyes met mine before softening. "Elijah," he said quietly, "I hope my presence does not disturb your evening." "Not at all, my lord. Please, sit." For a while we ate in comfortable silence. Damian barely touched his meal, sipping spiced wine, while I enjoyed Mrs. Gable's venison stew with fresh bread. The silence wasn't awkward. Little by little, the tension left his face. "Toby tells me you've made excellent progress in the glasshouses," Damian said. "The soil is responding well," I replied. "With proper care, the herbs should bloom again in a few months. Botany requires patience and hope." "Hope," Damian repeated softly. "A rare thing on this mountain." "It doesn't have to be." I smiled toward the window. "Besides, if hope fails, we can always rely on your impressive gatekeeping." Damian blinked. Then the corner of his mouth lifted. He was becoming rather irritating. I laughed. A real laugh. And a moment later, so did Damian. The rich, genuine sound filled the room, transforming his usually guarded expression. From the doorway, Barnaby, Mr. Gable, and Mrs. Gable watched in silence. Mrs. Gable wiped away a tear while the two men exchanged quiet, proud smiles. Their young lord had laughed for the first time in 3 years. When the laughter faded, Damian leaned forward. "You bring light into this house, Elijah," he said softly. I held his gaze, my heart beating just a little faster. After supper, I carried a silver tea tray toward the pantry. As I passed Mrs. Gable's quarters, quiet voices drifted through the corridor. "He smiled tonight, Barnaby," Mrs. Gable whispered. "I saw," Barnaby replied. "After that magistrate left, his lordship told me that if Silas ever returned, he wouldn't simply throw him out." "What did he say?" "He said he would tear down the provincial council itself before allowing anyone to lay a finger on Elijah. I don't think he realizes how completely his alpha instincts have claimed that boy." Hidden behind a stone pillar, I pressed a hand to my chest. He hadn't only defended his estate. He had protected me. That night, a fierce snowstorm swept across Blackthorn Mountain. Inside the private sitting room, a great stone hearth filled the room with warmth. Damian sat in a leather armchair, a glass of dark wine untouched beside him. I sat on the rug nearby, sorting through a pouch of rare botanical seed. "You should sit in the chair, Elijah," Damian said. "The floor is cold." I smiled. "I like being close to the fire. And besides, it's cozy here." A soft rumble escaped Damian's throat, almost like a contented purr, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. He picked up a soft wool blanket from the sofa and draped it gently over my shoulders. "Thank you," I murmured, wrapping it around myself. "I should be thanking you," Damian replied, his crimson eyes reflecting the firelight. "Before you arrived, this house was a tomb. I spent 3 years alone, waiting for the hunger to consume me." "Why didn't you ask for help?" I asked softly. "Because people fear what they don't understand," Damian said, staring into the flames. "A vampire alpha hybrid is seen as a weapon, a curse, a beast. No one ever looked at me and saw a man." My heart ached. Without thinking, I placed my hand over his. Damian stiffened in surprise but didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with mine as though afraid to let go. "I see you, Damian," I whispered. "I see a man who protects his people. A man who cares. I don't see a monster." He leaned closer, his warm breath brushing my face. "Elijah," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. We remained by the fire, hands entwined, two lonely souls finding comfort in each other while the winter storm raged outside. Chapter 6, Pages in the Dark. Sleep refused to come that night. Barnaby's words echoed through my mind. He would tear down the provincial council itself before anyone laid a finger on Elijah. Unable to rest, I slipped into a robe, lit a small oil lantern, and wandered through the silent halls to the estate's grand library. I wasn't searching for botanical texts. I wanted to understand Damian. Deep within the library, behind a wrought iron gate left slightly open, stood a private study. On the desk rested a thick leather-bound journal bearing the Blackthorn crest. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I did. The first pages contained estate records and political note. Then, 3 years earlier, the handwriting changed. It became uneven, painful. Animal blood no longer works. The hunger is no longer an ache, it is an inferno. My alpha instincts and vampire blood both cry out for a mate. I nearly hurt Barnaby today. I stopped only when my fangs touched his skin. I cannot trust myself around anyone. I will deny the beast until it dies, or until I do. A lump rose in my throat. Page after page revealed 3 years of lonely suffering. Then I reached the final entry. A scholar arrived today. His name is Elijah. The moment he entered the estate, my blood grew quiet. His natural scent of midnight violet calms the beast within me. Simply being near him brings a peace I have not known in years. But I cannot tell him. He must choose to stay, or I will let him go. Tears blurred the page. It wasn't chance. My scent had been easing his suffering from the very beginning. You shouldn't be in here, Elijah. I gasped and turned. Damian stood in the doorway, dressed in a loose black shirt, his dark hair slightly tousled. His crimson eyes held only quiet vulnerability. Damian, I whispered. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to pry. I couldn't sleep. He stepped into the lantern light, glanced at the open journal, then back at me. He looked exhausted. So now you know, he said quietly. You know what I am, and why I kept my distance. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, taking a step closer. Why didn't you tell me what my scent was doing for you? Because I didn't want to bind you to me, Damian replied. You came here to save your father. If you knew your presence eased my hunger, you might have stayed out of pity or guilt. He met my eyes. I wanted you to see me as a man, not a monster to be endured. His words broke the last of my restraint. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us and gently cupped his cheek. His cool skin trembled beneath my touch. Damian froze. His crimson eyes widened as though he feared I would disappear if he moved. I don't see a monster, Damian, I whispered. I see a man who carried this burden alone for 3 years to protect the people he loved. I'm not staying because I have to. I held his gaze. I'm staying because I want to be here. With you. The familiar scent of midnight violet drifted between us. Damian closed his eyes and leaned gently into my hand. A shaky breath escaped him, as though years of loneliness were finally beginning to lift. When he looked at me again, hope had replaced the loneliness in his eyes. Chapter 7. The Envoy's Rejection. The warmth of the previous night vanished with the morning. As Barnaby served tea in the conservatory, the heavy gates of Blackthorn Estate swung open. 4 municipal carriages bearing the crest of the High Provincial Council rolled into the courtyard, escorted by a dozen armed guards. He really doesn't know when to quit, Toby muttered, gripping his spade. Lord Silas stepped from the lead carriage, a high silk collar hiding the bruises on his neck. Beside him stood an elderly council archivist carrying a gold-stamped scroll. Lord Damian, Silas shouted. By order of the High Provincial Council, receive our decree. The great obsidian doors opened. Damian stepped onto the terrace, calm and unreadable, with Barnaby standing behind him holding a velvet-lined tray. I hurried from the glasshouse toward the terrace. For the briefest moment, Damian looked at me, and the crushing weight of his alpha aura eased. Speak quickly, Silas, Damian said. You're wasting my morning. Silas gestured toward the archivist. You assaulted an officer of the realm. But the council is prepared to overlook your behavior, if you comply with provincial law. The archivist unrolled the scroll. By decree of the High Provincial Council, full compensation for Marcus's damages has been paid by Lord Silas. The debt has been transferred to him, along with all rights of enforcement. My heart sank. Silas smiled. The provincial treasury has arrived to remit payment to Blackthorn Estate. Marcus's debt now belongs to me. Elijah's service contract is therefore void. He looked directly at me. Pack your belongings, Elijah. You're coming with me. Before I could react, Damian laughed. It was a quiet, chilling sound. How pathetic, he said, descending the terrace steps. Did you truly believe purchased judgments held authority on this mountain? He lifted one hand. Barnaby stepped forward with the velvet-lined tray. Resting upon it was an ancient charter bound in gold leaf and sealed with the imperial crest. This estate operates under a royal sovereign charter, Damian said. For 4 centuries, everyone who enters Blackthorn's service has been protected from municipal seizure, provincial debt enforcement, and council interference. Silas's face drained of color. That charter? No one follows that law anymore. I do. Damian turned to the archivist. As for the compensation, I refuse it. The old man blinked. I reached a private settlement with Marcus's family. His son's service satisfied the debt. I have no further claim against them. Then he faced Silas. Return the money to the fool who paid it. Silas stared in disbelief. You refuse the compensation? I do not sell people. The words echoed across the silent courtyard. Silas's composure shattered. No. He belongs to me. I'll bring the entire valley against you. Damian stepped forward until he towered over him. His alpha aura surged, forcing the guards to drop their weapons in terror. Leave, Damian whispered. Before I decide 12 guards aren't enough to save you. Silas stumbled backward into his carriage. Moments later, all 4 carriages were racing down the mountain road. Silence settled over Blackthorn once more. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the terrace. Damian turned toward me. The fearsome Alpha Commander was gone, replaced by the gentle man from the library. Are you all right, Elijah? He asked, searching my face. I am, I said with a smile. You completely humiliated him. He tried to take someone under my protection. Damian stepped closer and gently brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead. He will never succeed. Chapter 9. Behind the West Wing Door. The days that followed settled into a peaceful rhythm. Each morning, Damian visited the glasshouses before attending to estate affairs. Sometimes we spoke only briefly. Other times we shared lunch beneath the glass roof, while Toby teased us without mercy. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Estate, I laughed without forcing it. The night-blooming herbs flourished. Fresh emerald shoots covered the beds, and delicate silver buds appeared among the vines. They'll bloom within a month, I said one afternoon, brushing soil from my gloves. Your mother's garden is coming back. Damian looked over the thriving plants. I never thought I'd hear those words again. His quiet smile warmed my heart. As we walked through the conservatory, I reached to straighten a climbing vine. A thorn caught my fingertip. Oh! A tiny bead of blood appeared. Everything changed. Damian stopped. His body went rigid. His crimson eyes locked onto the drop of blood. His breathing grew uneven, his pupils darkening as his fangs slowly descended. Damian. Before I could react, he was beside me. He gently but firmly caught my wrist, lifting my hand toward him. For one terrifying heartbeat, I wasn't looking at the gentle man I knew. I was looking at a starving predator. Then his whole body shook. Horror filled his face. No. He released me instantly and stumbled backward, staring at his trembling hands. What have I done? Before I could answer, he turned and fled the conservatory. I stood frozen, still staring at the tiny cut on my finger. Moments later, Toby hurried over. What happened? I don't know, I whispered. He looked terrified. Damian didn't appear for dinner. Or breakfast. By the third day, the estate had fallen silent. Every morning, Barnaby carried a tray to the west wing and returned with it untouched. He hasn't eaten again, Mrs. Gable whispered. Toby sighed. I haven't seen his lordship hide himself like this in years. My chest tightened. What happened? Mrs. Gable asked gently. I looked at the small bandage on my finger. I scratched myself on a thorn. Understanding passed between them. Oh dear, Mrs. Gable murmured. It wasn't his fault, I said quickly. He stopped himself. He always does, Barnaby replied quietly. He has spent years choosing everyone else's safety over his own happiness. By the fourth morning, I couldn't bear it any longer. I need to see him. Barnaby stepped in front of me. I'm sorry, Elijah. His lordship ordered that no one enter the west wing. He isn't angry with you, Mrs. Gable added gently. I know, I said. But if he isn't angry, why is he hiding from me? No one answered. I turned and walked toward the western corridor. Elijah, Toby called. You shouldn't go, Barnaby warned. I kept walking. If he tells me to leave himself, then I'll leave. The corridor grew colder with every step. At the end stood 2 great black oak doors. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Resting my forehead against the wood, I whispered, Damian. For a long moment only the wind answered. Then came his weak, exhausted voice. Go away. I'm not leaving. You should. I won't. Silence. You don't understand. Then help me understand. After another pause, he spoke. I almost hurt you. His voice cracked. I smelled your blood, and for a moment, I wanted it. I thought I had mastered the hunger. Tears filled my eyes. But you stopped yourself. I almost didn't. But you did. I cannot risk a second chance. The quiet despair in his voice broke my heart. So your answer is to lock yourself away? I am protecting you. No, I whispered, placing my hand gently against the door between us. You're shutting me out. Neither of us spoke for several moments. When I was afraid, I continued softly, you protected me without hesitation. So please, don't shut me out when you're hurting. The hallway fell silent. Then I heard slow footsteps approaching the door. A lock clicked. The heavy oak door opened just enough for me to see him. Damian looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his crimson eyes, his dark hair was disheveled, and his hands trembled faintly at his sides. Gone was the commanding lord who had stood before the provincial council. Standing before me now was simply a weary man crushed beneath years of fear and guilt. I'm sorry, he whispered. I frightened you. Without thinking, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. For a long moment, he remained perfectly still, as though unable to believe I was really there. Then, with painful hesitation, his arms encircled me, holding me with extraordinary care. I almost bit you, he whispered against my hair. I held him a little tighter. But you didn't. A quiet, trembling breath escaped his lips as years of loneliness seemed to crack apart. Standing together in the silence of the West Wing, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, Damian was no longer carrying his burden alone. Chapter 10. Words, War, and Warmth. The days after our reconciliation passed with an unfamiliar peace. While a bitter wind whipped through the lower valley, Blackthorn Estate felt warmer than it had in years. Inside the grand library, a warm fire crackled as Damian and I sat together reading ancient poetry. For the first time in years, he no longer hid behind closed doors. That is an atrocious accent, I teased, setting my teacup down. For someone who has spent centuries reading old texts, your high court dialect sounds like a marching soldier. Damian looked up in exaggerated offense. I beg your pardon? That dialect was considered the height of elegance in the eastern capital. Key word was. I laughed and read the verse aloud. The midnight moon pales beside the silver rose. It needs softness, I said. Not an alpha giving military orders. A quiet chuckle escaped him as he reached across the table and took my hand. I have listened to many voices in my life, Elijah, he said softly. But none have ever made this house feel alive. Heat rushed into my cheeks. Somewhere between shared meals, quiet conversations, and evenings by the fire, our bargain had become something neither of us wanted to lose. Far below the mountain, a very different fire was beginning to burn. In the center of the village square, beneath the great oak tree, Lord Silas climbed onto a wooden platform. He had traded his expensive robes for a weather-worn traveling coat, carefully disguising himself as a weary protector. People of the valley, Silas shouted, we are in terrible danger. Merchants abandoned their stalls while farmers, blacksmiths, and townsfolk gathered around him. I traveled to Blackthorn Estate to rescue young Elijah, the apothecary's son. He pointed toward the snow-covered mountain. I saw it with my own eyes. Elijah is imprisoned inside Blackthorn Estate against his will. Every day he remains there, that beast grows stronger while the poor boy grows weaker. Fear swept through the crowd as old stories about the Blackthorn bloodline resurfaced. How long before the monster tires of one victim? Silas shouted. How long before he comes for our sons and daughters? The crowd erupted in frightened murmurs. We will not wait for evil to reach our homes. Silas snatched a burning torch from a nearby brazier and raised it overhead. We march to Blackthorn Estate. We tear down those gates. We rescue Elijah. And we destroy the beast once and for all." The frightened crowd answered with cheers, raising pitchforks, axes, and scythes into the freezing air. Silas lowered the torch just enough to hide the satisfied smile curling across his lip. He didn't care about rescuing anyone. He wanted vengeance. If the villagers killed Damian, Elijah would have nowhere else to go. Miles away, inside the quiet apothecary, Marcus heard the shouting as neighbors gathered weapons and followed Silas toward the mountain road. No. His heart sank. They've believed him. Grabbing his winter cloak, he hurried into the snow and began climbing the mountain trail with one desperate prayer. "Please, let me reach Blackthorn before they do." Chapter 11. The Fever and the Flame. For 3 agonizing days, the storm did not just rage outside Blackthorn Estate, it raged inside Lord Damian's private bedchamber. The 3-year cycle of his alpha and vampire instincts had finally taken hold. A brutal fever scorched his veins, threatening to shatter his mind if left unbonded. I refused to leave his side. Inside the candlelit chamber, the air was thick with heat. Damian lay across the heavy canopy bed, his silk shirt damp with sweat. His crimson eyes flickered with pain as he clutched the bedding, fighting not to lose control. "Elijah, please," Damian rasped, his voice ragged. "Leave me, go to the East Wing. I cannot risk hurting you." "I am not going anywhere, Damian," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, dipping a cool cloth into a basin of scented water and gently wiping his burning forehead. Then I leaned closer, letting the calming fragrance of my midnight violet fill the room, wrapping around his tortured senses like a comforting embrace. Damian let out a deep, shuddering breath as my scent washed over him. His wild eyes found mine, filled with such vulnerability that a tear slipped down my cheek. "Your scent," Damian whispered, lifting a trembling hand to gently cup my cheek. His touch burned with fever, yet remained lighter than a feather. "It is the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing me whole. But seeing you cry for me, it breaks my heart, Elijah. I cry because you shouldn't have to suffer alone anymore," I murmured, leaning into his warm palm and pressing a gentle kiss to the center of his hand. "Let me soothe the fever, Damian. Let me stay." 4 hours in the quiet intimacy of the candlelit room, I held his hand, hummed soft melodies, brushed his dark hair from his brow, and let the soothing scent of my midnight violet fill the room until his ragged breathing finally steadied. For one fleeting moment, peace returned to his eyes, and a quiet, profound love anchored us together. Then the world outside shattered. The heavy chamber doors burst open. Mr. Gable stood in the doorway, his usual calm composure gone. Supporting him was a frail, shivering figure wrapped in a travel-stained coat. It was Marcus. His lips were blue from the bitter blizzard, his clothes dusted with snow from climbing the treacherous mountain pass on foot. "Father," I gasped, springing from Damian's bedside. "Elijah!" "Thank God," Marcus sobbed, collapsing into my arms. He trembled violently as he pointed toward the courtyard below. "You must flee. Silas lied to the entire valley. He told them Damian is keeping you chained in a dungeon. He's turned the villagers into a mob." Outside, above the howling storm, the roar of dozens of voices echoed through the estate, joined by the glow of burning torches beyond the gates. "Silas brought 50 armed men," Marcus cried. "They have battering beams, pitchforks, and fire. They're breaking down the main doors." On the bed, the sudden threat to my life shattered Damian's fragile peace. His alpha instincts surged, dark, possessive energy racing through his veins as his eyes blazed crimson. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and staggered to his feet. Driven by the need to protect me, he bared his fangs. "Damian, wait!" I cried, stepping into his path and pressing both hands against his burning chest. "They have come to destroy my home and take you," Damian growled, his voice shaking the room. "I will slaughter them all. If you go out there like this, you'll prove every one of Silas's lies, I pleaded, meeting his wild gaze as the calming scent of my midnight violet surrounded us. You fought so hard to protect people, Damian. Don't let him turn you into the monster he wants the world to see. Damian froze, his chest rising and falling as my words broke through the haze of his fever. Then tell me what to do, Elijah, he whispered, his voice trembling. My blood is burning for you, and I cannot hold the fever back much longer. Then don't carry it alone, I replied softly, reaching up to cradle his face. Chapter 11, Blood and Light. Everyone leave us. My voice rang through the heated chamber. Barnaby bowed his head and gently ushered my father and Mr. and Mrs. Gable into the corridor, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. Silence filled the room except for the blizzard outside and Damian's ragged breathing. I turned back to him. The fever raging through his hybrid blood was tearing at his sanity. His crimson eyes glowed in the dim light, his fangs fully exposed as he gripped the bedpost to steady himself. Damian, I whispered, stepping closer until we stood only inches apart. I rested my hand against his burning cheek. Drink from me. Let me help you. Damian flinched and turned away. No, he gasped. Elijah, you don't understand. I've been starving for 3 years. If I taste your blood, I may not be able to stop. I could kill you. Tears filled his crimson eyes as he tried to push me away. Look at me, Damian. I gently cupped his face. I trust you. You are not a monster. You never have been. Elijah, the bloodlust. Trust us, I whispered, tilting my head. Trust what we have. Damian let out a broken breath. The faith in my eyes shattered the last of his fear. He pulled me into his arms and pressed a trembling kiss to my temple. Lowering his face to my neck, he breathed in my familiar midnight violet scent before, with infinite care. His fangs pierced my skin. A sharp gasp escaped my lips, followed by a strange warmth as he drank. Damian never lost control. He held me as though I were made of glass, taking only what he needed until the fever raging through him finally broke. When he pulled away, he gently covered the tiny wound with his thumb. His crimson eyes were clear once more, filled with relief and quiet wonder. The violent fever had broken. The hunger that had tormented him for days was finally gone. All that remained were two people holding each other, their hearts racing, having finally chosen one another. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? Damian asked. You didn't hurt me. I told you you wouldn't. You saved me. Damian whispered, cupping my face. We'll face them together now, I said with a smile, intertwining my fingers with his. Moments later, the heavy front doors of Blackthorn Estate gave way with a deafening crash. Silas burst into the grand foyer, flanked by 50 angry villagers armed with torches, pitchforks, and scythes. Search the hall, Silas shouted. Find the monster and drag Elijah out. You will not take another step, Silas. Silas froze. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was Lord Damian, calm and composed, the complete opposite of the monster Silas had described. I stepped beside him, wearing the silver crest of Blackthorn. Without hesitation, Damian intertwined his fingers with mine for all to see. The villagers gasped. Elijah, the village blacksmith stammered. You're not imprisoned? You're not being drained. I have never been in danger here, I said, my voice carrying through the silent hall. Lord Damian kept me safe. He accepted my service as payment, cleared my father's debts, and protected me from the real monster in this valley. I pointed toward Silas. Lord Silas lied to all of you. Months ago, he tried to force himself on me. When my father hid me, he used debts and threats to try to claim me. Lord Damian protected me. Everything Silas has told you is a lie. Whispers spread through the crowd as the villagers slowly turned toward Silas in disgust. Sheer lies, Silas shrieked, backing toward the shattered doorway. He has bewitched the boy. Kill the hybrid. Damian took a single step forward. A wave of calm, undeniable alpha authority swept through the foyer. Silas's guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. "Your game is over, Silas," Damian said, his voice cold and steady. "The Provincial High Council has already been informed of your corruption and your attempt to incite a riot against a royal sovereign estate. They are waiting for you at the bottom of the pass." Silas looked around desperately, but not a single villager moved to defend him. Realizing he was finished, he turned and fled into the blizzard, only to be met by the waiting Imperial Guards. Epilogue, Part 1, The Mark of Eternity. 6 months had passed since the night of the blizzard. The darkness that had once haunted Blackthorn Estate had given way to warmth, laughter, and the subtle fragrance of blooming midnight violets. Tonight, the manor was peaceful. A gentle fire crackled in Damian's private chamber as I stood near the balcony doors, looking over the quiet mountain valley beneath the stars. Strong arms wrapped gently around my waist. Damian rested his chin on my shoulder. "You're thinking deeply tonight, my love," he murmured. I turned to face him. "I was thinking about how far we've come," I whispered. "6 months ago, you drank from me to save your life. Tonight isn't about survival." His hands rested gently on my hip. "Elijah, I want our bond to be permanent," I said, holding his gaze. "I want everyone to know we chose each other." A quiet silence settled between us. "I spent 3 years terrified of what I was," Damian whispered. "Now, you are my world." He kissed my forehead with quiet devotion before gently embracing me. Our bond settled into place with quiet certainty, as though it had always been waiting for this moment. His heartbeat became as familiar to me as my own, and his deep, unwavering love wrapped gently around my soul. Our pheromones surged, intertwining in the unmistakable fragrance of our bond. He traced the mark gently with his thumb, his expression soft as he looked into my eyes. Without a word, Damian gathered me into his arms and carried me to the canopy bed, laying me down with extraordinary care. He rested his forehead against mine. "I have waited an eternity for you," he whispered. "And I am right here," I breathed. Wrapped in each other's embrace, we remained together in the warmth of the quiet room, finally at peace. Epilogue, Part 2, 7 months later. 7 months had passed since the night the storm broke, and 1 month since our bond was sealed. 1 month after our mating ceremony, I returned to the Royal Academy to begin my studies. Damian refused to let me abandon the future I had worked so hard to reach. During the week, I attended lectures in the capital, returning to Blackthorn Estate whenever my studies allowed. The journey was long, but every homecoming reminded me why I had chosen to keep moving forward. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass panes of the grand conservatory, bathing everything in warm golden light. The once barren garden had been completely restored. Silver-leafed night vines climbed the iron pillars, midnight violets bloomed in fragrant abundance, and the rare medicinal herbs that had nearly vanished from Blackthorn Estate flourished once again. Blackthorn's medicines were now sought throughout the valley. Each week, Barnaby organized deliveries while Toby happily complained that the conservatory had become busier than the manor itself. Even my father visited openly now, no longer burdened by old fears. The estate that had once been feared had become a place of healing. That afternoon, Toby had gone to the market to deliver fresh medicines to my father's apothecary, leaving the conservatory wrapped in peaceful silence. I stood at the central workbench, carefully trimming a flowering stem when a familiar pair of strong arms slipped around my waist. Damian drew me gently against his chest, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You've been in here for hours, my love," he murmured. I smiled, resting my hands over his. "The autumn harvest is almost ready. Barnaby says the valley has already doubled its orders for our medicines." "Then they can wait a little longer," Damian replied with a quiet laugh, turning me to face him. His crimson eyes, once shadowed by loneliness and endless hunger, now shone with warmth and quiet happiness. "You brought life back to this estate, Elijah," he said softly, brushing a loose lock of hair behind my ear. To these gardens, and to me. I smiled and gently cupped his face. No, I whispered. We brought each other back to life. His answering smile was brighter than the afternoon sun. Leaning down, he kissed me with the same quiet tenderness that had carried us through every trial. Around us, the midnight violets swayed gently in the warm breeze, drifting through the open windows, their sweet fragrance filling the conservatory where our story had first begun. And in that peaceful moment, surrounded by the gardens we had restored together, I knew I was already home. The end. And that brings us to the end of the Alpha Lord's sacred bond. If you enjoyed Elijah and Damian's journey from fear to love, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your favorite moment, and subscribe to BL Heartstring Stories for more original BL audiobook. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, take care.